Hey guys, I'm Adam Stinespring. I'm a realtor here in Lynchburg, Virginia, and I find that a lot of first-time buyers have a completely misunderstanding about this whole thing. They think, oh, I look at a house, then when I'm ready to get a house, I call a realtor and I call the lender. And then that's about where they stop. And there's a lot more that goes into it. There's nuances, there's things that you as a first-time buyer need to understand before getting into this. Even if you're relocating from somewhere else, and maybe it's just your first time buying in Virginia, this video can still be for you. There might be some important things that are different than where you're coming from. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first thing to note, if this is your first time buying a house, there's a reason you're buying a house. And yes, it's to have something of your own. There is something special. It makes you feel good about owning something that is yours. But more than that, from my perspective, we are now building up your net worth, thinking towards the future. What is net worth? Net worth is just what your assets are, meaning your positive money minus your negative money, which are your liabilities. In 2025, the average net worth of a renter was $16,000. You can see this number. The average net worth of a homeowner was $420,000. That is a huge difference. Now, that doesn't mean as soon as you buy a house, you suddenly have that much in net worth. What it does mean is people who own a home are getting there way faster and will be exponentially more. And there's a reason for this. The reason is equity. So equity contributes toward your net worth because it is what your home is worth minus what you owe. So in this example, it's $300,000 value minus you owe $270,000, and so equity would be $30,000. That is why we get a home and we stop renting. It's not because the monthly payment is cheaper, because sometimes it's not. Oftentimes it's not. But what it is it is contributing towards building equity in your net worth. What can you do with equity? It's not just money in your pocket. It is in the asset. It's kind of like a stock. So you can, except for not as liquid, like you can't pull it out. What equity can do? One, when you sell, you get the majority of that. There are fees to selling. That's a different conversation. But when you sell, you can use that towards a down payment towards your next house. So if you bought your house and you only put $7,000 down, and then 10 years later, you now have $100,000 in equity, that's pretty significant, and you can use that towards down payment towards the next house. Or if you did find your dream home and you don't need to move, there's a lot you can do with $100,000 in equity. You can borrow against it with a home equity loan to maybe do improvements, or maybe it's to fund your kids' college because the interest is cheaper on those. There's so many things you can do when you have an asset that's worth something, especially when it's a significant amount of money. I think you get the idea. Buying a home is good. And over time, prices go up and how much you owe goes down because you pay down the loan. And so equity increases over time. I think you get the idea. All right, next, who is involved? Really, there's three entities when you are getting a house. The title company is during the contract. They just make sure the transfer from seller to buyer is legal and clean. You just don't want somebody raising their hand later being like, this is my house too. You don't want that. The two people you need to talk to way before you buy a house, lender and realtor / real estate agent, they're kind of the same thing. The lender, he's all things finances. He is the first conversation. I find this is the piece that buyers oftentimes get wrong when they're thinking for the first time. They're like, oh no, I'm just looking. And then I ask them, oh, so you've already talked with a lender? They're like, oh no. I'm like, okay. Looking at houses without a pre-approval letter for a loan is kind of like going to the grocery store without a debit card. It's like, yeah, you can look, but you have no way of getting a house. And quite frankly, you don't even know how much house you can get. The lender's job is to take income, credit, and a lot of factors into play and say, hey, whenever the time comes, you can get this much house. Great, right? That's why they're the first conversation. And the reason you talk with a realtor sooner is because they usually have a good lender connection. because we've probably worked with enough of the loan people to be able to tell you who's good and who's not, at least somebody who's experienced and has a lot of repetitions in helping people. And then finally, realtors. We are not salespeople. Realtors are closer to lawyers than we are a car salesman, even though HGTV definitely makes us look like car salesmen most of the time. My job as a buyer's agent, if I was helping you, is not to sell you anything. In fact, it's to do the opposite. It's to set the right expectations for how this whole thing goes. Exhibit A is in this. It's to help you prevent future problems whilst under contract, while you're in pursuit of the house, and hopefully for later by pointing out things and giving you the right connections elsewise. And to understand you, because this is an emotional process. I think sometimes a good portion of my job is counseling, because when big money is involved, big feelings tend to get involved too, and people don't think straight when the big feelings are involved. And so a large portion of what I do is coach and help people through the process. Some people don't get as emotional, but oftentimes there's just so many things that buyers don't understand, and sometimes they're afraid to ask. And so knowing what they need, what you as a buyer need before you need it, this thing is one of just the best skills you can have as a realtor. Now, each side has their own agent. The seller has their own agent. The buyer has their own agent. The seller pays their agent. They sign an agreement. It says, hey, you get paid this much for selling my home. The buyer's agent's agreement is similar. It is the buyer's agent gets paid this much money for helping the buyer. Now, commissions are negotiable. I don't want to get sued here. Commissions are negotiable, always and forever, including when you're making an offer. So in the contract, in the offer document, you can negotiate the buyer's agent fee to be paid for. And because I am personally good at my job, most of my buyers end up paying none of my fee, because we negotiate it to be paid for by the seller, and most sellers expect this to be the case. Why? Because buyers, especially for the first time and even in general, are already paying for down payment and closing costs. And so it makes more sense to take the money from the proceeds of the sale versus attempt to tack on more money for the buyer at closing, because especially first-time home buyers don't really have this as an option. And historically speaking, it's made sense because it evens out later. Whenever you sell your house, the same will probably be true, where the buyer's agent will probably put their fee into the, I think you get the idea. But the good news is, for buyers, generally, it is almost a free service. Now, here's the reality. If, let's use hypothetical numbers, let's say that the buyer's agent's fee is $100 and the seller is only paying, $80, or when you negotiate, they're only willing to pay $80. You would have to bring the extra $20. Now, those are very small numbers. You get the ideas, right? The difference does have to be paid for by the buyer, and this would be a discussion before we are even pursuing the house, as in before we are under contract. This will be a conversation that's had to see if you as a buyer are willing to pay the difference for your realtor. All right, this is my favorite part. So one of the number one things that I find that buyers have a misconception about is timeline and when does stuff happen. We already talked about the whole, I don't want to talk to a lender or a realtor until I'm ready to get the house. And by that point, it's already too late. The financial timeline is what I call it. This is probably one of the most useful things that I've found for my buyers. It gives them a perception of timeline of how things are going to go, not only with the process, like when things happen, but even when money stuff happens. So the good news is, the second you talk to a lender and the second you talk to a realtor, nothing happens financially. Even when you sign the agreement and even when you get pre-approved, nothing is due. You don't pay any money for that. Even when you start looking for houses, this is still free. Once you're pre-approved and we are actually at houses, we're already signed and we're looking for them, all it costs is gas money. It's great. Most buyers first-time buyers that I work with, we can find them a home within the first few months. Sometimes it takes longer. It depends on the expectations, it depends on the budget, and a lot of different factors. Generally, I find it takes longer for larger families who have a tighter budget just because of bedroom count. But we can usually find a home within the first few months as long as the expectation is set correctly. Now, finding home, what does that mean? It means we make an offer, so we find the right house. We'll talk about how to do that in a second. Under contract means that we make an offer, negotiate, and then everybody signs the contract. We are now under the contract, under its authority, hence under contract. I know, pretty crazy, right? Once you're under contract, this is when money stuff starts happening. So there's 3 small things that happen, and then closing day, which is what most buyers are thinking about when they're thinking about the cost of homes. That is when the big stuff is due. Let's start with the small stuff and then we'll move on to the big stuff. So the small stuff. Number 1, the first one is usually due within the first few days of under contract, and this is called the earnest money deposit. It works nearly identical to a security deposit when you're renting, meaning it goes to an entity up front and it comes back to you at another time, which in this case is closing date. So let's say your closing costs are $10,000 and you put $500 as an earnest money, your closing costs are now $9,500. So inspection, this is important. Virginia is what we call a buyer's beware state. And it sounds scary, and it can be if you don't understand how to handle it. So what this means is the seller is basically required to tell you about if there's something extremely wrong with the house and it can kill you, or if there's lead-based paint, and that's it. Seriously, like that's it. Like that's all they have to tell you about. It is tough as a buyer when it comes to defects of a home. But that's exactly why the inspector is so important, and some other things we'll talk about here in a little bit. But the inspector specifically, this is prior to you getting to the house. This is a contingency, which means if inspection does not go the way we want it, you can get out of the contract and you can get your earnest money back. We don't want that to happen, and most of the time it doesn't. The inspection goes like this. It's usually within the first 10 to 14 days of being under contract. We get an inspector, he goes out, he's usually $350 to $400. He gives you a really long report, and this long report makes it look like the home is falling apart. The home is obviously not falling apart, it's still standing, but he's going to make it look like that because it's his job. He wants you to know as much as he found about the house. Will he find 100% of every single possible problem? No, but they're pretty good at their job, and will find the functional defects that are in this home. They're not going to find everything, but we're looking for functional defects, things that will be a problem for you later as a buyer. Then with that report that he gave us, we will select the items that are important. We're not going to be like, oh, there's a chip in the wall, right? We're not going to do that. If it's new construction, it's a little different. But if it's just a home and it's cosmetic or not things that are a big deal, or you can go to Lowe's for $20 and fix it, those aren't the kind of things we're looking for. We're looking for the big stuff: electrical, plumbing, HVAC, roof, things that are going to cost you a significant amount of money later. Those are the things the inspector looks for, and those are the kinds of things that we ask for and negotiate the seller to pay for. So we get the report, we make a request to the seller. Sometimes there's a negotiation back and forth, meaning the seller says, well, we'll fix these, but not these, or we'll give you a credit. There's a negotiation back and forth. Most of the time we can come to a conclusion. And if we can't come to a conclusion, again, we do part ways and you get your earnest money back. But that's not the goal. The goal is to come to a conclusion, because even though the inspection feels scary, I remind my buyers that we do still want the house. And we just want to know that these aren't going to be a problem later. And oftentimes we can walk into a home and I can kind of tell how the inspection is probably going to go just based on the nature of the house. And then the final contingency is the appraisal. Let me go back to this. The appraisal is a guy going out to the house. He's usually somewhere between $500 to $700. He is sent by you and your lender to make sure the house is worth what you're paying in the contract. So if you offered $300, they want to make sure the house is worth $300. Now, I kind of do his job ahead of time so that we don't have a problem, but he is the one officially on paper who says this is the value. I won't go into the nuances of what happens if it doesn't, but again, you are not stuck if it comes in below. We'll leave it at that. And then finally, closing day. So from under contract to closing day is about 30 days. So even from the time you start looking, you're at minimum 1 month away from having a home. But you're probably more likely from the time you start looking at least a few months out. I'd say my average first-time home buyer probably finds a home within the first month because new homes are popping up every day. So closing day is when you get the keys, you sign the papers, the house is yours, woohoo, take pictures, all that fun stuff. And then the not fun stuff is down payment and closing costs. So when buyers are thinking about a home for buying a home for the first time, these are the big things they're worried about. So the first thing to know, you do not need 20%. No matter what your parents say, you as a first-time home buyer don't need 20%, and it's not going to be the best option for you to save up 20% to get it, because if you're saving $1,000 a month and you're still paying $1,500 in rent, it doesn't mean you're saving $1,000 a month to buy a house, because it doesn't make that much of a difference in the monthly payment for you to save up 20% for 3 years. Most first-time home buyers use something called an FHA loan, which is a 3.5% down, and there are lower down payment options. This is why the lender is so important. There's many options for first-time buyers who don't have a huge pot of money to put down because it's not beneficial. It's beneficial to get the asset with the least amount of money. There's a concept in investing we call cash on cash return. You want to get the biggest asset for the least amount of money. So the lower the down payment, the better if you can still get the asset. Down payment and closing costs are two different things. Down payment is just that. It's how much you're putting down. Closing costs is anything that's not down payment. So this is lender fees, title fees, insurance, taxes, basically all the other sign here fees when it comes to buying a house. And it does not apply to your equity. It's just the cost of buying. The good news is, just like my fee or the realtor's fee, literally right above that in the contract, you can negotiate the seller to pay for closing costs. And I generally recommend this over getting a better price. Because in 7 years from now, you're not going to care whether you got the house for $5,000 less. I promise. I've talked to people who bought a house 7 years ago and they can't even remember. What will matter is you saved an extra $10,000 in your pocket at closing so that you could use it and have a little nest egg for potential problems or maybe updates that you wanted to do. It's way better to do that than to just get an extra $5,000 to $10,000 off the house, because every $10,000 in overall price really only affects the mortgage payment by like $60 to $70, at least as of right now. Check with the lender. It's per house, per situation, but it's going to be better to get closing costs covered because you can use that money to put more equity into the house versus just having to pay it because you have to get the house. And the final one most people are surprised by is most mortgage companies, your first mortgage payment isn't due until the second month after you close. So if you find a home in July and then you close in August, your first mortgage payment isn't due until October. This is relevant because when you're renting, usually you have a lease that's expiring at a certain time. If it's month to month, great, this is still important, but it helps us line up when you give your landlord a notice, and it gives us enough buffer time to do so. This is actually super convenient so that your lease and your mortgage payment don't overlap. So let's say we do find a house in July and we get past the inspection and appraisal and we're about 20 days in. This still gives you enough time to give your landlord usually enough notice that your last lease payment won't overlap with your first mortgage payment. And hopefully you're getting your security deposit back so it could help you out with that. But it does help line up these things, and per situation we'll figure out, okay, when do we need, we basically reverse engineer, okay, based on when the first mortgage payment needs to be, how far back do we need to reverse engineer it for when we need to start looking so that it doesn't overlap. If you're month to month, it doesn't matter too much, but it is still nice to know that. Monthly budget expectation. Right now in this area at this rate, generally, these are general numbers, not exact. Your situation is going to be different. A $300,000 house is probably going to cost you anywhere from $2,000 to $2,300 a month. A $200,000 house is probably going to cost anywhere from $1,500 to $1,600 a month. Give or take, it depends if you're in the city, outside the city. Right now, the average price point in Lynchburg is $300,000, but the sweet spot for most first-time home buyers are probably in the $200 to like $300 range. Another piece to this puzzle, it's kind of self-explanatory, but convenience drives desire and desire drives price. So essentially, less desired areas are going to be less money. higher desired areas are going to cost more money. Three more things, and then we'll get off of here because I know this video is getting long. So we find houses two ways. The first one is on market. The second is off. When I say on market, what I mean, anything that is listed on Zillow, Redfin, Realtor.com, Homes.com, truly all of those, they all have the same houses. I find that even experienced buyers still think if you shop at different sites, you're going to get different houses, and that's not the case. They all are pulling from a central database, it's called the MLS, and they all are showing you the same houses. The only way you're going to get more homes is with off-market, things that aren't on there, and it's not going to be by going to different home search websites. What it is going to be is having a realtor who has off-market connections. As an example, I over here at Acree Brothers and Keller Williams have a pretty large pool of off-market deal access because of my connections to other agents who are saying, hey, this is coming up. Do you have anybody who wants this? That's essentially what it is. It's saying, hey, they're not ready to hit the market yet. We're going to do a couple more weeks. They're still signed and all of those things legally, but it gives buyers who work with that agent the opportunity to see these homes before they hit market. Why is this beneficial? It's not just because, oh, you have more options. Off-market deals, you don't have to worry about hundreds of thousands of people seeing these homes, right? These on-market homes on Zillow, they have tons and tons of views, right? Tons of people who are looking at them. Off-market, they usually only have a few. And so, especially as a first-time home buyer, which is where that competition still lives, having off-market access is pretty big. Now, does that mean that every single week I'm going to have the perfect house for you off-market? No. But it does mean that this is where I keep my ears to, and then I let you keep your ears to Zillow. Because why would we both look at Zillow? We're going to do the same thing. I don't have any extra resources on Zillow or extra homes on Zillow. It doesn't work like that. It's not like car lots where, each realtor has, more homes on their site. It doesn't work like that. So I let you look on Zillow, and then I look off market where only I can see. And then together, we actually do have more options. Next rule, how do we actually determine when we make an offer? So anytime you see a home online, we're going to use the 1 to 10 rule. You rate the home from 1 to 10. 1 being, ew, this house is gross. 10 being, oh, this house is awesome. And I'll give you my right arm for it. In order for us to go see the house, it needs to be a 7. Sometimes it can be a 6, but it probably should be a 7. We aren't here to look at houses. We are here to find the house, especially because gas is not cheap. I don't want you driving all over the place to 100 houses when you're probably not going to offer on 98 of them. And this helps us break that down so that we're only looking at homes that have a high potential for making an offer and actually being what you want. Seeing more homes doesn't give you more experience. This helps us just go look at what homes you may offer on. So if it's a 7 and we go see it and it stays 7 or goes up in ranking, we should make an offer. There's no such thing as the perfect house as a first-time home buyer. Please hear me. There is no such thing as this. I see first-time home buyers every time. They're like, oh, based on my $150,000 budget, I need 5 acres and 4 bedrooms and 3 baths, and it needs to be fully updated. And okay, hold on. We need to have the right expectations for your needs versus your wants. And based on your budget, we can introduce other wants into the equation, but we must figure out the needs and the things that are not changeable. So things about the home that aren't changeable, where it's located, that's why location is important, how much land it has, structure of the home is, these are things you can't change. But we are looking for, does it fit the needs? And are these other things reasonably changeable? And of course, if we go to the home and it goes down, right, because pictures are deceiving, then we don't make an offer. We just move on, and that's okay. But this is how we determine when is it time to make an offer. We aren't looking for the perfect house. We're just looking for the place you stop paying rent and you start building equity. Another thing, even experienced buyers have a problem with this. The listing price has nothing to do with value. Value is driven by demand. Listing price is probably relatively close to the value, like within a certain percentage range. But the way we determine how we make an offer and where the home's value is in accordance with demand and activity. What I mean is, How many days has it been on market? How many people have seen the home in the past X amount of time? And how many offers do they have? This is what we mean by activity. There's a full spectrum here. On one side of the spectrum, you have, okay, let's say you love a house and it's an 8 out of 10, and you go to make an offer, and I call the listing agent and they say, oh yeah, there's 3 offers already. It's only been on the market 48 hours and we're making a decision tomorrow, at noon. This means whatever the listing price of the home was, it was likely listed under its value, right? And this doesn't make it a bad investment. This doesn't make it a home you shouldn't go after. You can't overpay for a house because your lender won't let you, and I won't let you. And so we will figure out what that cap is based on the comparables and say, okay, it's worth still going after this home because you love it. Just because there's a bidding war doesn't make it a bad deal. It means the listing price was under what it was worth. The opposite is true, and this is what people expect when they go to see a house. They think it's like cars, where they're like, oh, you have to lowball everything, but you don't. You lowball this situation, which is the home's been sitting for 60 days. It hasn't had a price drop. It has no showings, no offers, no nothing in weeks. That means it's overpriced. That's the home that you lowball because it's been sitting, and it means it was listed above its value. Now that threshold right now is anywhere from like 3 to 4 weeks. If it's been sitting for longer than that, that's longer than the average days on market. And so that's really when you start, offering less, really start trying to negotiate. But the truth is there's a spectrum between these two extremes of gone in 24 hours and sitting for 2 months. And my job, whenever you like a house, is to figure out where is this home sitting in this value spectrum in accordance with its listing price. We talked about this a little bit, and this is pretty much the last thing, problem mitigation. So in the buyer's beware state, it is important that we get ahead of problems and protect you against them later. So getting ahead of them looks like getting the inspector, which we already talked about. The 2 ways we worry about afterward are homeowner's insurance, which you have to get, and home warranty, which is optional. Homeowner's insurance, your lender makes you get because you have to be able to replace the home if it was to go up in flames. And so this is a protection against the asset, and it would just help you rebuild in case of something like that. But the home warranty is kind of like a car warranty. It's a little less finicky, covers a certain window of items about the house for a certain time period for a certain price. I have a guy who knows way more about this than I do, and I send you as buyers to him so he can explain a little bit more. But especially in Virginia, I've started including this in offers because you can actually get the seller to pay for it. It's in the contract. You only need 2 things as a buyer to start looking and to actually get a home. And that is a pre-approval letter from a loan person, aka lender, and you need a signed agreement with a realtor. Neither of these things mean that you have to get a home within a certain time period. You signing with a realtor, you getting the pre-approval, none of that has anything to do with timeline, the type of home you have to get, none of it. We're not looking for the forever home. We're just looking for the right one. And waiting to talk with a realtor and a lender when you've found the home is kind of like trying to build the boat in the middle of the storm. So what I'm trying to do with this video and when I talk with buyers way beforehand is building the boat before the storm comes. So if you want a captain for that boat and you want to start building the boat before then, feel free to reach out. My information is pretty easily accessible. Thank you. I hope this was helpful. If there are more questions or things you don't understand, please feel free to either reach out, leave a comment, anything like that. I am here to help. So thank you for your time, and I guess I'll talk to you again soon.